Hey, what's going on, everybody? I want to thank you for joining me today here with Adorama and with Westcott for this event, off-camera flash for stunning wedding portraits. Um, so again, thanks for taking the time out of the day to come and hang out with me. Now, this is a little bit different format than if you've ever seen me speak before. Obviously, we don't have that personal one-on-one interaction, but if you have questions along the way, I encourage you to go ahead and ask those questions and let's make this thing a little bit more interactive. I'm going to be sharing, images that I've shot as well as some image diagrams and even, breakdowns of images that I've taken over time in terms of off-camera flash setups. And if you have questions, be sure to chime in so we can talk about them right then and there and address any questions that you have. So for those who know who I am or don't know who I am, rather, my name is André Brown. I'm a wedding and portrait photographer based out of Atlanta. I started shooting in 2015, and since day one, I've always been Team Canon. So all my Canon people chime in the comments and drop a C in the comments to let me know that you're Team Canon. Um, Over that time, I've been blessed to have been named a brand ambassador for a lot of amazing companies, one of which is Westcott, who is our sponsor for today's event. I'm the host of Boca Academy workshops, which are hands-on photography workshops. Most of them are internationally. We do have one coming up in July, where we'll be going to Dominican Republic and working on wedding imagery, fashion imagery, and that sort of thing. So if you have any questions about those types of events and want to join me, message me on Instagram, and I'll be able to send you over any information in regards to that. And over time, I've been blessed to have won a number of awards from a lot of great organizations like WPPI, the Portrait Masters, most recently the Cosmo Awards, as well as PPA. And here you can see some of the awards that I've won over time. I have like I have like 6 or 8 additional that I've won since I've taken this photo. But again, I've been, blessed to have won these awards from a lot of great companies. So again, today we'll be talking about off-camera flash for stunning wedding portraits. And for me, when it comes to off-camera flash, I use light however or whenever it is I need to be able to get whatever specific job done that I'm doing. But the biggest thing for me is I'm always using off-camera flash for whatever my high impact images are. So as you can see, I have images behind me. These are images that I obviously have taken here in my studio, but I make a large portion of income just strictly based off of selling wall art. Wall art is my thing. And a lot of that derived from, purchasing images and stuff like that from your home for your home. And you go out, you spend all of this money. And then as I became a photographer, I wanted to be able to create unique pieces like that for my clients to be able to hang inside of their own homes, as opposed to going out and spending, you know, $1,200 on a portrait at Z Gallery, right? Um, that somebody else has in their home, somebody has in their business. The idea was to create these, unique images. And anytime I'm creating high impact images is when I'm using off camera flash. So again, I want these images to be special for my clients, right? But I also want to be able to have some great imagery that I can use to sell during my IPS sessions. So in terms of lighting equipment, when I'm out on a wedding, this is what my current lighting equipment looks like. So I'll have FJ200s is what I take to weddings. I do have 400s, but those are here in the studio. But I always have the 200s with me when I'm out on a job. I have my FJ80 Mark II speed light that I use to trigger them. And in terms of lighting modifier, anything that you see from me 9 times out of 10 is a softbox. So the Westcott Octa M is going to be my go-to for that. I can light two people. I can light a couple. I can use that in conjunction with something else to be able to light, larger groups, which I'll show you guys some images of that today. But I do also have the Octa S, but I have an older version of it, so it doesn't quite work on my with my 200s, but it works with the FJ80 speed lights. But I like the 200s because I can get as much power as I can get a lot more power out of that one light than what I can out of my speed lights. But if you want a full list of all of the gear, cameras, and all of that stuff that I have at weddings, then you can just scan a little QR code that we have here at the bottom of the page, and you'll be taken to that information so you can have access to that. So why do we use off-camera flash? Obviously, flash has a very distinct look as opposed to what just straight up natural light photos look like. You're able to get a lot more contrast. Like, it just has a completely different look than what one would get if they're strictly shooting natural light photos, so like that light and airy. And I don't classify myself as a photographer that's natural light versus a flash shooter. I just use whatever tools I have at my disposal in order to create the types of images that I want. So I think one of the questions that we had in the pre-chat was, how often am I using what is it? What was it? It was something in reference to how often I'm using natural light versus flash. And to be honest, 95% of my day when I'm shooting a wedding, it's probably natural light. I'm looking around trying to find any light that's interesting but available to be able to help me move quickly. But in those situations where that light cannot help me to produce the images that I want, because I can make high impact images with natural light, directional natural light. But we don't always have the time for flash. So that's one of those things, right? But in the times where we do have time for flash and we're not being able to get the light output that we want, then pop up a flash, softbox, or some sort of modifier, and then go in and knock it out. So I use whatever tools I need in my toolkit in order to be able to create the types of images that I want. So with Flash, we have two main objectives that we can do. We can use that flash to complement the natural light in order to enhance what's already there, or we can use the flash to be able to create dark and dramatic, moody portraits. And today we'll be talking about both, and I'll show you in detail the different types of images that you can create along with the lighting diagrams for how those particular shots were set up. So first, let's talk about natural looking portraits with off-camera flash. In that set of circumstances, our goal is going to be to blend the light in the scene with the off-camera flash. We'll blend the off-camera flash with the light in the scene in order to lift those shadows and just enhance what's already there. In that particular type of scenario, you need to the first thing that you need to do is figure out what your camera settings are and get those in place before you start to think about the light. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make with flash. They'll come into the scene and they're trying to adjust the scene and the flash at the same time. If you've ever seen me teach at any conferences or even, been with me while I've been working on any particular day, I'll turn my flash off or pull it off. I'll pull my trigger off of the hot shoe or turn the flash off, figure out what my ambient settings are, and then now from there I can go in and add the flash to to make the image come together in the way that I want it to look. So let's say we have a case where we're trying to create natural light or natural looking images and we're outdoors. Once we get the camera settings adjusted, so let's say it's maybe 12 o'clock. No, 12, we all know 12 is the worst. So let's say it's around 3 o'clock. We don't have that direct overhead light. We already know for the most part it's super bright outside. So ISO 100 is going to be a given. Just about every image that you'll see today, I shoot at F4. Like F4 is pretty much where I live. I know there's a lot of, oh, I want to be at 1.4 or 1.2, where like not at all. I'm not really concerned with that. I want to be sure, especially if I have two subjects, I want to be sure that they're both in focus, right? And I'll only go further on my f-stop if there's some sort of detail in the back that I want it to be pretty enhanced. But you'll be able to see even with the images that I show you today at f4, I'm pretty much good to go. But ISO 100, because that's going to be for the most of us, that's going to be the lowest we can go. Us Canon shooters, we have a low mode, which is fantastic. I'm not sure if the other camera companies have that, but Canon has a low mode. I believe it equates to about a 50 ISO. So, you know, you want to bring the light down in the scene as much as possible. I'm at F4, which is still introducing a fair amount of light into the scene. So from there, in order to get my desired result, I'll just adjust my shutter speed in order to get the scene where I want it to be. And then from there, go in and add my off-camera flash. So if you see this image here, you can see that the light is predominantly coming in from the right side, and that's the sun. But here, my goal is to complement what the sun is doing. If I was to have them turn their faces the other way and then light them from the other side, you can see in the frame itself that the shadow from the sun is going to be more prominent than what my flash could do. My flash probably in this set of circumstances would not create any sort of shadow on the other side, but it's also not going to give us any depth on the couple because on the right side of their faces, you see that we have the highlight. And then on the left side of left side camera left, you see that we have those shadows. So that gives us the ability to be able to add depth to the image to create more interest. So again, I'm lighting from the same direction of the sun. I'm not trying to push, I'm not trying to uh manipulate the view to do anything different than what's already there. But I do have a flash that's you will see in the next diagram. It's very close by, and it's basically just filling in how dark it is on the camera left side of their faces because the light from that sun is super harsh. So you see here from this particular diagram, that's roughly about where I have my light. Any questions so far? Chime in the chat. But this particular lighting setup is almost the basis for any of the lighting setups you'll see here today. This is pretty standard for me. I wanted it at roughly about a 45 degree. I use the edges of whatever my modifiers are to be able to control the light. So most people would take the center part of this light and then point it directly at their subjects, but I'm using the edges in order to determine which way I want the light to go. And indoor, for the most part, is where that's going to be more impactful. You don't want light spill on walls or just anytime you want to be able to control light, you can do it with the edges of your softbox, and it doesn't always necessarily have to be a grid or something of the sort, which I do use, grids fairly often to get to the result that I want to get to. 1 second, looks like we have a question. The question was, do I put the light on the opposite side? No, I don't put the light on the opposite side. I have, and as a matter of fact, the next image I have coming up, I do put it on the opposite side, but I'll actually be explaining to you why I put that image on, why I put the light on the opposite side of the sun in that particular case. This one, it says, so in your lighting diagram, the lighting on the lighting on the left side of their face, that's the side that their faces are already lit by the sun. No, so if we go back to this image, yes, you can see, try to get my mouse over. Oops, looks like we lost something here. Hold on, guys. One second, I lost my screen. So if you see this image here, the lighting that's on their faces, you can see that hard light that's coming in from the sun. But I want to say time of day was probably around like 3:30 or something like that. I mean, the sun is really, really hard. The camera left side of their faces is it's almost black because the contrast from how powerful the sun is and me having to dial down the settings in the camera is on that shadow side, you're not able to see much at all. So with that, I'm using the flash in order to be able to add a little bit of light into the darker side of their face, the shadow side of the face, to lift those shadows. So it doesn't look like a complete split light situation. I do have some details in the shadows. One second, let me figure out how to get your questions back. Cool. It's Kathy. Does that answer your question? I'll go ahead and move on and then we can always come back. You guys have questions. So, Jeff, you were asking about me putting the light on the opposite side. No, in that last image, I used the light to complement the sun and what was already there. But in this image, I actually lit them from the same side, but in this same excuse me, in the from the same side as this diagram. But as you can see, the sun is coming from the complete opposite side this time. And the only reason why I did it in this circumstance is the lighting on this scene. Like I've shot at this venue a number of times. The lighting of the sun, although you can see on the building itself and on her shoulder that we're getting that kind of rim from the sun, with the trees and everything else that's there, it doesn't quite reach their faces. So there's other elements in the background that's kind of it's not giving us the ability to be able to have any of that sunlight bleed into their faces. So their faces in this set of circumstances are relatively dark as it compares to the background. So I lit them from the other side so that I can use the sun specifically as a rim light in this set of circumstances. Any questions about that? Nope, I'll move on. So this particular image, same lighting setup. I'm using uh that same 45-degree setup. This time I don't have any modifier on it other than a grid. So I put a little grid on the light and I have it pointed directly at the couple's faces. This is the latter part of the day. And my objective here is basically just to take what the natural scene looks like. If you see inside of the arch, you'll see it's closer towards that sunset. So we're getting that warm tone. But with all of that extra sky behind them, if I dial down to be able to get the sky portion, they're going into almost complete darkness. So I'm using a 200 with the grid on it just to funnel that light directly towards their faces. I don't want to light up the chest or anything super bright. I know that the little bit of information that's there, I can pull that out in post, but I'm really just focusing on their faces in this set of circumstance. So I have the light pointed at their faces just to give them enough pop to make them look like we're there standing in the scene as opposed to making them pop out of the scene that we're standing in. Now, the following photo is the complete opposite. So, same lighting setup as the last image, but it's at a completely different time of day. This is this is about 11 o'clock in Miami. It's super cloudy outside. If you see all of the foliage in the background in their outfits without any sort of light on them, their their faces, they're blending into the background. So I needed to be able to add light again to illuminate their faces and make them pop off. One second, we have a question. It's asking for the settings of the couple in the red dress. I don't have that information here in front of me right now as I pull this stuff into a presentation, but in any of my classes, you'll know that I teach that settings don't matter. Everything is relative to whatever the particular set of circumstances are. If we go back, you know that I mentioned that in a brighter setting of the day, I'm probably going to be at ISO 100 because I want to bring down as much of that background, the overall lighting in the scene as humanly possible. I'm confident I shot this image at f4. I shoot mostly everything at f4. So from there, in order to be able to get the clouds in the sky and other details if it's more overexposed, then increase my I have to increase my shutter speed, which means in this set of circumstances, I'm in high speed sync. The question is, how far do you place your speed light from the subject? It's all relative. So in certain situations, I believe this shoot, I shot it by myself. So I'll have it a little bit further away because I don't want to have to do anything in terms of photoshopping it out. I can't catch a plate shot if there's nobody there to kind of pull it away. But again, my goal is to control light as much as possible. So even in some of the other diagrams that I'll show you later on, you'll see that I have my light and my light stand pretty close to the client, maybe 4 feet away. If I have an assistant there to pull that light out. One, because the further away it is, the more that light is going to spread. And that doesn't allow me to control the light as much as I want to. But if I can move it in closer, I can almost spotlight it to some degree on the particular areas that I want to be able to focus on and not have that light spill into anything else. The question is, do I primarily work solo or have I had assistants holding lights? You know, my friend, that I have assistants holding lights because you held the light for me before. But um, I'll say maybe about 80% of the time I'm running solo. If I know for sure like there's some sort of lighting setup that I'll need some help with, then I'll plan to bring somebody along, or I'll plan to recruit a groomsman or make a plan to have my second shooter with me at a particular time so that I can create whatever images that I need to create. But actually that the image that I'm going to show a little bit later on, which is the one that you helped with, that is probably the most complicated of, I need an assistant to shoot situations that I've had. But ultimately, you've seen the image. We have a great image, but I'll show that to everyone else here in a little while. So back to this again. I have the camera set up excuse me, I have the light setup camera left to be able to add a pop of light so that their faces and their hair doesn't end up blending into all of the foliage that's in the background. This situation here, again, one light. I want to balance the couple in this scene. Yeah, there's drama because you have like these clouds and the stone wall is it's wet from the rain, so it's kind of darkened down. But my goal was to make them blend into the scene and with the overall exposure of that particular house. So I didn't want it to be super dramatic and have them pop off. I wanted it to look pretty natural to the eye. Whereas in this particular circumstances, this is an engagement session that happened here in my studio. My objective was to make this look like natural light. I personally don't think that you would be able to tell, or you would automatically be able to tell that this is off camera flash, but this is a 400 here in studio. I have the lighting modifier was a 7 foot umbrella with the diffuser on the front, and the goal was to make it look just as it would look with the large windows that I have in here, which I have 15, 16 foot windows here in studio. And I wanted it to be able to have that look and make it look natural. So before we move on to dramatic lighting, are there any questions that we have? I'll give it a sec. Nope. All right, we're just gonna move on. So with to create dramatic portraits, then our objective is to reduce the overall light in the scene. We want to be able to pull all of the ambient exposure in the scene down as much as possible where we can still kind of see details, and then use our off-camera flash to be able to make our subjects pop off of the background. So in a scenario where you would be outdoors on a particular day, if you want to do something like that, you're 9 times out of 10 gonna be in a high speed sync situation, which means your ISO is gonna be low, your shutter speed is gonna be, relatively high, so in high speed sync, and then whatever your flash output is gonna be, I would assume it's gonna be medium to high. Um, but it's going to be relative to whatever it is that you need to do to make your subjects pop off of the background. Remember, if you're in high speed sync, then it's going to cut down the amount of power that comes out of that light. So you're almost going to have the power that you have in your light. So in order to be able to illuminate your subjects, you're going to have to push that light up more. We had a question: what modifier did I use in which image, Dr. T? This is a 7 foot umbrella by Westcott. That's primarily what I use in studio. And this image would be my Octa M or my Octa S. I can't remember which one I had with me at that particular time. Same thing with this scenario. Actually, no, this particular scenario was like I had an orb or a sphere type modifier on it because I wanted the light to kind of spread a little bit, but also be soft light. You'll almost see nothing from me that is a super, super hard light source. But back to creating dramatic portraits. So this particular scene, this image was taken in Dubai, um, probably roughly around 5:30 in the afternoon, which at this particular time of the year, we still had quite a bit of daylight. But the goal is to be able to darken down the scene and make it look super dramatic. So I don't remember the exact settings, but probably somewhere closer to 100 ISO. Again, me always at f4. And then I use my shutter speed in order to be able to control the rest of the light that's in the scene. Now, what you can't see in this particular image is exactly where where my light holder is standing. So I had an assistant over there, and he was standing four, maybe about 3 feet left of where that bush is in the frame, pointing the light directly at the subject. 1 second, we have a question. For the studio shot, how far away was the light? What's the angle? What's the height? Is it feathered? For me, always feathered. I always feather my lights because I want to be able to control how much of that light is being dropped onto my subjects. I want to reduce the amount of spill on the background. As you can see behind her, we have more light hitting the background where she is, but that's because that's the part that's closest to the light itself. I always feather my light across my subjects. In terms of angle, um, I would like to say 45, right? Because that's the mindset that we have, but with a 7 foot umbrella, um, it's not quite a 45, but it's still that mentality of taking a light, pointing it down slightly for your subjects, because I want that light to come down and across the same way that the sun would come down and across. And in terms of height, it's a 7 foot umbrella on a C stand. I literally have it on the C stand. I don't have it pulled up any higher. It's literally just that 7 foot umbrella on a FJ 400 on a stand. And in terms of how far it is away from the subject, out of frame. I don't I don't really I work based off of if I see it and I like what it looks like, that's what it is. The whole technical portions of it, things either work or it doesn't. If I have it at the lowest power that I possibly can and it's too much light, then I pull it back because I know that that's going to reduce my light output um, based on inverse square law. So I don't really think that much through it when I'm thinking about distances between my light and the actual subjects. So back to this particular image, this is what a lighting diagram for that would look like. So as you can see, I have the couple staggered mainly because if he's standing directly in front of her, my light will not fall over to her. So I have them staggered so the light will kiss him and then also get her. And if you can see based on my lighting, the placement of my modifier here, I do have it overlapping her as well because I want it to be able to illuminate the dress. So in this, that same one light, which is a octa S in this case. So 24-inch softbox is illuminating his face, her face, as well as the dress. And the light that I'm using is a 200. And again, it is one light. I'll have it tilted up just slightly because I want to be able to reduce the amount of spill that goes onto the ground. Since I'm not super close to them, the further away that light is, let's go back to this example. The further away that light is from them, you'll see that I'm using the edges on the sides to be able to control the feather, but there's also edges on the bottom that are going to control how much of that light hits the ground and what goes up into the air. So I wanted to tilt it up just a little bit to reduce the amount of light that's hitting the ground as well. I wasn't able to completely reduce it, but then, that's something that I could also do in post with being able to turn down that exposure. Any questions about this particular image? You can go ahead and drop them in and I'll move into the next one. This is a very similar situation. This is Las Vegas. It is roughly about 3 o'clock in the daytime. So we're not in a situation where we have like the sun setting or anything like that. But as you can see, it was a very cloudy day. But in order to be able to get those clouds, I have to dial down that exposure so that I can get the clouds that are there versus being in a situation where I have to then go back and swap them out in post later on. So my My lighting assistant in this case was brave enough to stand on the side of this little cliff with me in hopes not to fall off with us, right? But the light is camera right. And as you can see, I didn't tilt the light up as much as I probably could have or should have in that set of circumstances. So if you look at the bottom, like where their feet are, you'll see where that light from the softbox starts to hit the rock and illuminates it, because everything to the right is a little bit bluer, it's a little bit more underexposed versus the light that's under their feet, and then everything to our camera left. But this is what that would look like relative to the scene that we have there. So our light is camera right. I have her turned into him, and I'm lighting from this side that is going to give me light not only on his face but on her face as well. Because had I lit them from the other side, then any light that would be falling onto him would be blocked by her face. So those are the types of things that I'm keeping in mind with what side I'm putting the light on, and that's generally relative based off of whatever my bride, whatever her side is. If she has a particular side of her face that she likes versus the other, then I'll 1000% make that accommodation, because yes, I want to be sure that she feels like she looks great and that she's confident in the images, in hopes that they'll come in and they'll buy some wall art and take these images and hang them on their walls. Let's go back. Sorry, wrong way. So this particular image was a little bit trickier in that regular set of circumstances, I would typically have my light would be the equivalent of my lighting assistant standing off of the side of the balcony. So I was forced in this situation to have to light them from a side that wouldn't quite be the choice that I would make in this set of circumstances. But overall, I got a beautiful image. This image, I'm able to dial down my settings in order to make that sky pop out. This is my first time shooting a wedding in Tennessee, and as you can see, the mountains and stuff look incredible. And I want to be able to show that and create an image that they'll be proud of, to be able to hang inside of their home, and it reflects the fact that they got married in the mountains inside of Tennessee. But as soon as I start dialing down the exposure in order to be able to catch the hot spot of that sun, where they're standing, you'll see like those trees right behind them, they're in the abyss. So now I need to be able to light them up in order to show them inside of the frame of this image as well, to have a more completed image. So Kathy asked, do I ask them to turn their faces towards the light? 100%. You always want to direct them to exactly where you want them to look. And typically that's our light source. Obviously, and I believe I have some images in here, you'll be able to see that I might have my bride looking into the light, and I'll have my groom looking into her. And in those set of circumstances, I'm fine. My main concern is always light on her, because the harsh lines and shadows, they tend to look good on guys, and they don't always tend to look good on our ladies. So I'm always going to be directing the faces towards the light source, or in some situations I'll have my groom looking into the bride. Leah asks, where do you get your images printed? It varies. So H&H Color Lab is my lab of choice. They've been great to me. Everything that I have here on the wall is from H&H. This particular one here, the classic modern, is my favorite. The image that we're looking at right now on screen, my clients, they got this image in a classic modern. But great company, incredible customer service. So again, that's where I get all my stuff printed. This image, same thing. I want to be able to create that drama and turn these things into beautiful wall portraits, whether it's canvas or our classic moderns. And here is raining on, well, it had been raining on the day. Nothing really pretty about the sky, but we know that if we can dial down those settings, even though the sky looks gray to us, our cameras pick up something completely different in most cases. And here I'm able to dial down those settings in order to be able to find the little bit of detail that's out there in the clouds. But in order to be able to see that, I have to take them into a place where they're underexposed and I'm lighting them camera right. In this particular set of circumstances, I brought my videographer to hold the light for me since it was really windy and be able to illuminate my subjects. For this image, one light, 24-inch softbox, camera left. I wanted a high contrast on her. I wanted it to look more dramatic, but also kind of fashiony with this particular light choice. The light is relatively closer to her in this situation, probably about 2 feet, because I really wanted to be able to have that contrast of highlights and shadows, which you can see that we get on her face. If you look at her nose, then you'll see that the camera right side of her nose in that situation goes into heavy shadow. But that's what I wanted. So as opposed to being in a situation where I moved it as maybe from 45 degrees to about, you know, 25 degrees, I didn't want that much light on the camera right side of her face. I wanted that hard shadow, or not hard shadow. I wanted some shadow, but I didn't want it to be split light. So I didn't have it like at a complete 90-degree situation. But these are all images that we've taken with off-camera flash. And as you can see, even though the lighting setups are somewhat similar, but also very different, in each set of circumstances, we're able to produce a different result. So Crystal asks, how long would it take you to set up these shots on a particular wedding day? It all depends. So if we're in a situation like this image, that was something that had to come together on the fly. Uh we we basically just grabbed them, took them outside to be able to get whatever photos we could get because we weren't able to get as many photos in the beginning of the day as we wanted because of the rain. So this is something that was like set up on the fly. A lot of times I'm planning what it is that I want to do, primarily because I like to be able to think forward. The very first thing that I do when I get to a wedding is set up my lights. And if I'm at a location where the wedding and reception is all happening in the same place, I immediately go to whatever the respective ballrooms are, put in the lights that I need to have, put them on light stands so that I can be prepared. And I always have one what I call rover light with me. That's a 200 with the softbox on it on a Manfrotto Nano stand that I can move quickly with throughout the day. So that when things happen on the fly, I can just go in and make them happen. After I've done this enough, I can almost walk into a scene and know, all right, cool. Well, I'm indoor. This is going to be a situation where I want to be able to see the light sconces on the wall. So, all right, I'll be at ISO 2000. This I'll be at F4 because F4 is like my thing. And at that point, I'm typically within sync speed. So now there's really only 2 or 3 pops of the flash to be able to dial in my lighting on the subject. So I'm pretty quick with it at this particular point. But if it takes you longer to get from point A to point B, I say take that time. I think that people get too much into the pressure of I have to be able to do it immediately on the fly, and then you start to overthink. I'm an overthinker, big time, right? So if I start to get in my head now, what may have only taken me 2 minutes to set up might have seemed like 10 minutes. Now you're nervous and you're not producing the work that you want to produce. Take your time, figure out whatever it is that you want to accomplish and make it happen. Our clients hire us because they see our work. They don't necessarily always know what goes into making that happen. I know that I can go on scene sometimes and something will come together, boom, just like that. But then other times that isn't always the case. But I know what they hired me for. I know that they want wall portraits like this. So I take a reasonable amount of time in order to be able to get from point A to point B with that. So if you're an overthinker like me, then stop it. Stop it. Just do what you need to do in order to get the desired result that you want. TS, how long do you typically spend with the wedding couples? Wedding photographers know sometimes the planners or the schedules, they only want to give you 5 minutes. In a perfect world, you can get like a cool 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I know I have photographer friends who say they get all of this amount of time here in Atlanta and the way that things have been set up. I mean, granted, I shoot weddings everywhere, but mainly here in Atlanta, you don't get that much time. Cocktail hour is for family photos, for couples photos, and for bridal party photos. And if you're shooting in the market where things like reveal photos inside of your reception spaces is a thing, all of those things have to happen in that particular amount of time. So sometimes it could be 5 minutes, sometimes it can be 15 minutes. So you just have to be able to use that time as wise as possible. And when I do, I'm always mindful to get the things that the clients hired me for. If I only have 5 minutes, I'm going for the big portraits that I know that they want, you know, um, because again, that's why they hired me. Plus, that's where I make money in being able to sell products. So I don't get much time, and you probably don't get much time either. T. Moving on. Same one light setup here in Puerto Rico. Um, Nasty skies. You can see this is a sky replacement, but pretty nasty sky. And I needed to be able to do something to make the image pop. So in order to be able to bring interest to the overall frame, high power was just a 200, but high power flash on them to bring more drama. So that allows me to darken down everything in the overall scene and then pop a sky in that's relative to the dramatics that we see there. Here, same thing, dialing down those settings to be able to illuminate the sky that's there. And then shooting from the same direction that the sun is in. You see the sun is kind of illuminating him here on the background, but I'm reducing the amount of light on them in my settings in order to be able to get this backdrop. Moving on here, same thing, exposing from my scene. In truth, this is a sky replacement. This is not the actual sky, but this is a sky replacement. And sometimes that's what you have to do. But because I know that I'm reducing the overall, excuse me, because I know I want a dramatic sky, I'm reducing the light on scene in order to be able to illuminate my subjects to match the dramatic sky that I know that I'm gonna put in there. If I put in a dramatic sky and the lighting on them is very is very soft and there's no contrast, those two things wouldn't necessarily, line up when you look at the image. So I try to keep that stuff in mind while I'm shooting. And if the majority of the time, if I know that I'm going to replace the sky with something dramatic if I'm on the scene and there's nothing in the sky. That's when I'll make the determination to use a dramatic sky. Same as I did here. We were in we were in Mexico for my photography workshop, and it had been raining all the way to this particular location. And once we got here, the sky was flat. But I knew what the overall result I wanted with the dramatics of you see how all of the detail inside of the this church that's behind us here, all of that detail there. I knew that I wanted the light to be kind of contrasty. So then I popped in a sky that would be relative to that. Same thing here. Question from Moses is there a tool or plugin you recommend for sky replacements? Um, in the past, like my go-to over the years have been Luminar. Luminar was the first tool that just made it really easy to be able to pop in skies. Later on, which is like a few years ago, Adobe had their sky replacement tool inside of in Photoshop, and I know people that rave about that. I am a creature of habit, so I still do my replacements inside of Luminar. More from the dramatics. This picture was actually taken at roughly about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun is relatively high in that it's brighter outside, but it's a cloudy day. When we're under this structure, and as you can see, it's covered, but obviously, if there's direct sunlight coming in, those lines would bleed into being on the couple. So I dialed down my settings to be able to kill all of the brightness that's coming off of the sky. In the back, if you look in the very, very back of the image, you can see that there's clouds and stuff back there. But I dialed down those settings to cut down any additional light that may be coming in from the slats inside of this particular structure. And then my lighting assistant is standing off to my right, holding the softbox up overhead, but a little bit more directly towards them for me to be able to illuminate them in this set of circumstances. Here, I want to say this is about 5:30. And although you would think it's a little bit closer to sunset, depending on the time of year, obviously that's very sunsetty, but the sun had already moved to the other side of the city, but there was a whole lot more exposure going on in this image than one would be able to tell with the naked eye. I dialed down my settings to give that almost silhouette to the backdrop of the city, and then I just put one single 24-inch softbox on the couple, shot it from across the street with my 70 to 200 in order to be able to get this look that I have here. Same exact thing here. 70 to 200 F4. My lighting assistant is probably standing about halfway through the frame, and with a light feathered on the subjects here. Same thing here. And the same thing here. So when we start talking about dramatic portraits or taking dramatic portraits indoors, we touched on it briefly earlier, but my main objective is to expose for whatever the ambient light is on the inside, the wall sconces, if you're in a reception space and you have candles or there's like twinkle lights and things like that you want to be able to pull in, you need to be able to expose for those lights. So typically I won't need to be I won't need to be in any sort of high speed sync at that point. I'll likely have an ISO somewhere upwards of 1250 to 3200 to be able to pull up that ambient light, which means that my overall flash power on my subject is going to be relatively lower because the ambient the amount of light that's available in the scene that's being pulled in is going to be a lot, considering that my ISO is a lot higher. So this particular image is one that I was talking about with someone earlier who asked the question. I do have an image breakdown of this later on in the talk that I'll show you all. But the biggest thing here was to be able to capture the light that's being thrown on the stairs. So if you see the top stairs where the bride is, that light that's on there is actually coming from an overhead skylight. It's not a ton of light, but it's enough to where it's illuminating those stairs. But also I have to take into consideration the light that's on the same level where our groom is, those little LED lights to kind of guide, walkers on the path there. I want to be able to be sure that that's there, but also not over expose those at all. So exposing for whatever our ambient situation is, and then adding light to our subjects to be able to match that. We have the same thing here. The same thing here. This shot is primarily the ambient light, and then me adding a light behind them to rim them out, but also wrap around to illuminate them in the front so that they're not in complete silhouette. And then again here, as I was talking about the images with the candles, I want to be able to see the light on the individual candles, but I also want to be able to have light on my subjects as well. So I expose for my background and then adjust my light, which is my 200 on my subjects. So image breakdown. So we saw this earlier, and again, I wanted to be able to get the highlights of the light that's coming from that skylight down on the actual stairs, but also keep the light that's on that handrail in the frame as well. Because one is visually interesting, and two, it's a leading line for my subject. So this is what the final image looks like, but this is what it looked like when we're actually shooting. So this particular wedding, I had two lighting assistants come and help out while I was in town. And I talked them through the shot and exactly what it was that I wanted to do. I knew that I was going to have them on two different levels, but that required me to obviously have two different lights as we're indoors. So as you can see, I have spheres on both of my 200s, and I'm using it in a manner to just kiss light on them, not illuminating the whole bodies. I just want a little bit of light on their faces to be able to make them pop off, which gets us to this result. Here for this particular image, have you seen I've shot this this location here in my portfolio a number of times. This one's a little bit more convoluted in the setup in that it was a super overcast day because it was literally raining before we walked up. But I needed to get light on her and a little bit of light on him and the veil toss. So this was one time I had a lighting assistant with me and I put him to work. So this is what the lighting setup was. So I have my 400 on one side, illuminating the subject, and you can see from this particular frame itself that 400 light is predominantly lighting her. The the 200 that's on the left with the sphere running is only only there to add fill onto his face so that we can lift his face out of shadow. So when I pull it up in post, then I have information there as opposed to not having any information. And then I had my assistant toss the veil and then go and pull this light on the right out of the frame, and then the one on the left was just photoshopped out. Any questions about those images at all? If you got any, just go ahead and drop them in and I'll continue to move on. Same location, popular location here in Atlanta. And uh, basically did the same thing. With work, if anybody's worked with me or heard me talk, you'll know that I love directional light. I want all, I want to mimic a natural light setup in terms of natural directional light setup as much as possible. So again, we're in a situation where this particular day, it had rained earlier in the day, and our scene was already just kind of flat. There was no light in the scene to be able to make anything kind of pop off. However, this time I lit the subjects from the same side. I do have two lights, one that's mainly focused on the overall scene, and another one that's, excuse me, not the overall scene, but the overall subjects. And then the other light that's focused more so on their faces. So one is a softbox, and the other one is a more sphere shaped light that's pointed directly at their faces in order to be able to give me the exposure that I want on them. Now, moving forward, since we don't have any questions, group shots. My typical lighting setup for group shots looks just like this. It doesn't matter whether it's 4 people, whether it's 8 people. I've done up to 19 people with the same exact setup. 2 lights, all from the same side, but I have those lights performing 2 different tasks. The first light, which is the one that'll be further to the right, that one is going to take care of lighting up the people that are on that right side of the frame and pushing down as far as it can possibly go. I have the light feathered on the edges because I want it, again, I want to be able to control the light as much as humanly possible, but I also feather that light so that it'll go all the way down and hit as many people as possible. Now, if I'm in a situation where I cannot light the entire group with that, then I need an additional light source. And the job of that light is basically to just pick up where the other light left off. So a lot of times people will see images like, oh, you use the 2 light setup, one on each side. No. Sometimes I've done that. There are times that I've done that, and I think I've included some examples here for you. But 99.9% of the time with my lighting setups for groups, this is exactly how I set them up. And this is exactly what I did here. I have 2 lights set up on this side. They're 400s. That first light feathered to be able to hit my bridesmaid in the back that's pregnant, to go all the way past the bride as much as humanly possible. And then that second light is set up to be able to fill in anything that that first light was not able to fill in. Same scenario here. We have some natural light that's in the frame. So if you look in the back of the room, you'll see that there's natural light that is in the frame that's coming in off of the windows to the right. So I'm lighting from the same side that the light is naturally coming in. Thank you, T. I appreciate the comment. I truly appreciate it. So I'm lighting from that side. I want to keep that same consistency of light direction on my subjects as the remainder of the scene is getting as well. One second, we had a question. Earlier you mentioned that you shot a photo at ISO 2000. Do you find grain? Do you use topaz or anything? I don't use anything to reduce any grain in images. I think the biggest, I'll say, myth of high ISO is that there's going to be this level of grain, right? Now, if you see my images, one, I pull the shadows up in all of my images a lot anyway. And a lot of that is because of the difference of how it looks in print. How we see things and how they go out on the internet, you don't have to worry about getting I won't say that you don't have to worry about the blacks getting muddied and things like that, but when you start to take images into a state of being printed and you want a higher quality print, you want to be able to see the details that are inside of the blacks, inside of the shadows. I see a ton of images, crust the blacks. That's cool, to look at on your phone and online. But when you go to print your images, it does not print the same. If that I'm passionate about image competition, and one of the biggest things that they'll talk about in image competition is being able to see details in the shadows. And in those image competitions, they're typically print. So in order to be able to do that, then I want to be able to pull up the shadows, not to where I don't have any blacks at all, but I want to be able to take an image and zoom into that actual image and be able to see the contrast between the lapel of the jacket that's velvet and then the suit itself that's either polyester or silk. Even if they're both black, I don't want it to all be black. I want to be able to see that there's two different types of materials there. So that's something to keep in mind as you guys are doing your images. And the same goes for the scene itself. You can look at the scene in this image, these pillars, you'll see that there are portions of the pillars that are more raised and others that are depressed. I'm able to see the contrast between the two of those because I'm being mindful about the information that's in the shadows of the image. So I'm pulling up my shadows so that I can see those details. But no, I don't use anything like topaz for grain. If you add the proper light, if you add the proper amount of light to your scene, you won't have to worry about any excess grain per se. So no software is going in to reduce that stuff for me. And V, I appreciate the love on the shots. I appreciate it. Now, for the times that I have had to um, do multiple light setups on opposite sides of the room for groups, I do have a couple of images here that I've done that for. This was one of those images. I if you've never been in this room, you don't know that this room does not have a lot of depth. So for me to be able to put two lights on the same side in this room just wouldn't have worked. Like there's other furniture, there's other things in this place that wouldn't allow me to be able to do that. So unfortunately, I had to light this image with one light on either side, which was completely fine in this case. There's roughly what, probably about 14, 16 people in this image or something like that, right? And I needed to be able to get light on every single one of them. But I also need to be able to control the amount of light spill that's on the pictures and stuff that are in the background. So on the right side of the frame at the bottom, on the bottom image rather, you'll see there's a little halo of light over the top of the subject, but for the most part, I'm able to control that with feathering the light as much as humanly possible to where it'll skim across my subjects and not affect what's going to happen on my backgrounds. Jenny says, what kind of f-stop are you using to keep the details? And are they sharpened afterward? I don't sharpen the images at all. Anything that you see that's there has to do with just control of contrast and introducing contrast by the way that I'm lighting the subjects. And in terms of f-stop, most of the time it's F4. I know the next image coming up, I'm positive, was at 5.6 ultimately because I just looked at that not that long ago. But the goal is to keep people on as much of the same plane as humanly possible. Plus, the further back you are, the distance between focus and out of focus on a subject from 5.6 or 6.3 to F1, excuse me, to F4, excuse me, you won't be able to see that much of a difference stepping back. But my goal is to keep people as close to being on the same plane as humanly possible, which is what I did here. You do get like that staggered effect, but I have people moving forward and back to keep them as close on the same plane as possible. Um, Isaiah, same thing. What was your f stop? Yeah, f4 likely, 5.6 max on most photos. This image I know for sure was at 5.6 because I just looked at it not that long ago. And this lighting setup was one light on either side. It was this is actually one of the first times when I had the FJ200s, had one on the right, 24-inch softbox, feathering across the one side. It almost got across to everybody. However, I needed a little bit of light on the opposite side to fill in shadows. So I took a sphere, threw the sphere on the top, and popped just enough light in there to to be able to lift the details. Excuse me. Excuse me. To be able to lift the shadows so that I can have detail there in those images. Same thing here. This is 100% f4. No, this is f4 for sure. Same light setup as this last image. So a sphere on one side, which is camera left. You see that's where the predominant source of light is coming from on that left-hand side. And then from the right, softbox from the left, and then the sphere coming from the right to just fill in whatever shadows. Christina is asking, what lens am I using? It varies. This I'm confident was the 24 to 105 because when I shot this, I didn't have my 28 to 70, so this is definitely 24 to 105 f4 Canon. This image is 24 to 105 f4. This one was 24 to 105 f4. And this image here as well is 24 to 105 f4 at f4 with that two light setup on either side, 24 in softbox on the right, and then a sphere on the left hand side of the frame. So that brings me to the end of the slides that I prepared for you. So now is the perfect time. If you guys have any questions and you want to talk about any specific images, then we can talk about that now. So go ahead and drop any additional questions that you may have into the chat. And also in the meantime, while we're waiting, if you want to stay connected with me, this is where you can find me. There's my Instagram, my website, my education platform where you can find out any courses that I have um, available for you to be able to do any additional learning. And I invite you to join my private Facebook group. You can just scan the QR code there. It'll take you there and you can sign up to come and join us. TS, with the last image, what was your f-stop? So last image, I'm assuming is gonna be the very last one. I'm not sure how long ago you asked this. But this image, it's a good question, T. I know I'm confident I'm over 1250 on this particular image. I'm never higher than 3200. So somewhere between that 1250 and 2500 is where I am on this particular image. Anika, thank you. I appreciate it. Crystal, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, if you all aren't in my group, scan the code. I hope to have you all inside. So doesn't look like we have any additional questions at the moment. But if you do, then definitely reach out to me on social media or pop into the group and ask the questions in the group. I'll be happy to continue asking questions, answering questions for you all for the remainder of the day. Looks like we have one. Jenny, do you usually have a 24-inch softbox when you're photographing outdoors? Is it straight or what's the angle? 24 inch softbox with me the majority of the time. The rest of that time is my Octa M, which I think is like a 30, 32. But yeah, typically that 24 inch softbox in terms of angle, 45 degrees, 45 degrees from camera to subject, and then roughly, 45-degree on the tilt as well. One of the things I'm mindful about is wanting to be sure that I have catch lights in the subject's eyes. I don't want the eyes to go into complete blackness. And I want to be mindful of that. So sometimes that high angle is too much to be able to get light inside of the subject's eyes. So I'll bring it down and be sure that we can get those catch lights so that my subjects don't look like they're in the afterlife inside of my images. Again, guys, if you have any additional questions, go ahead and join in on the Facebook group and ask any questions there. I'm available all day to answer questions. I'll just be working. So thanks again for taking the time to pop on and hang out with me. And looks like we have one more. What else do you use? Let me see. 24 to 105 looks amazing. What else do you use this for? Just for group portraits? No, so not just for group portraits. At the time, I didn't have a 24 to 70 or the 28 to 70, which is typical, which is what I have now. But that was the only 24-ish lens that I had at the time. I have my 15 to 35, 24 to 105, and 70 to 200. So as much as humanly possible, I try to use my 70 to 200. That's just always been my favorite lens, primarily because I love compression. I will shoot a group shot across the street on a 70 to 200 before I'll shoot it on the same side of the street with a 24 being somewhere in that 24 to 50 range because of the distortion that happens when you're closer up on your subject. If I take this cup and I point it closer to the camera, you see that the cup itself distorts. But the further away that cup gets, the more it looks like correct perspective. So 70 to 200 is always my go-to. If I'm on that 24 to 105, unless it's something where I'm in a tight space and I need to be closer and closer to 24, I'm shooting that thing as close to 105 as I need to for that particular set of circumstances. So I will always default to compression over anything else. But again, head on over to the group, ask away with the questions. I'll be happy to answer. Thank you again to Adorama. Thank you to Westcott for allowing me to come on and sponsor me for this event. And I hope you all have a great day.